Princess Zarathiel stood at the vast observation deck of the Celestial Palace, her 6 arms gracefully folded as she watched the morning suns rise over the crystalline mountains of Zirion Prime. Her scales shimmered with a soft blue luminescence, a sign of contentment among her people, the Zarathi. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of her marriage to the most peculiar being she had ever encountered, a human named Marcus Chen. The marriage had been arranged as part of a diplomatic treaty between the Zarathi Empire and the small human colony that had somehow managed to establish itself on the edge of Zarathi space. When the negotiations began, Zara had expected to meet some hulking warrior or cunning politician. Instead, she found herself face to face with a quiet, unassuming man who spent most of his time reading ancient texts and tending to a small garden he had created in the palace courtyards. Marcus was unlike any species she had studied in the galactic databases. Humans were listed as a recently spacefaring race, technologically inferior, with no significant military achievements or territorial expansions. They were noted as being remarkably peaceful and showed an unusual tendency to adapt to alien environments rather than terraform them to suit their needs. The reports painted them as harmless explorers, more interested in learning than conquering. Her husband seemed to embody these characteristics perfectly. Marcus never raised his voice, never showed aggression, and spent his days in quiet pursuits that the Zarathi nobility found utterly baffling. While other species' diplomatic representatives demanded audience chambers, military honors, or territorial concessions, Marcus had simply asked for a small plot of land where he could grow something he called tomatoes. The Zarathi court had initially been insulted by what they perceived as the humans sending such an unremarkable representative. Some of the more militant nobles had suggested it was a deliberate slight. But Zara found herself oddly charmed by his gentle demeanor and genuine curiosity about Zarathi culture. When he learned their language in just 3 months and began composing poetry in the traditional Zarathi style, even the harshest critics began to warm to him. Their courtship had been unlike anything in Zarathi tradition, where Zarathi males typically demonstrated their worth through displays of strength, territorial conquests, or elaborate technological achievements. Marcus showed his affection through small, thoughtful gestures. He learned to prepare traditional Zarathi foods, despite the fact that most of the ingredients were mildly toxic to humans. He created a hybrid garden that combined plants from both their worlds, somehow managing to make species that should have been incompatible thrive together. The wedding ceremony itself had been a blend of traditions that somehow worked beautifully. Marcus had insisted on learning the ancient Zarathi ritual dances, despite having only 2 arms to the traditional 6. His earnest attempts and graceful adaptation of the movements to his human physiology had moved many of the wedding guests to tears, a rare display of emotion among the typically reserved Zarathi. Now, 3 years later, Zara had grown to love her strange, gentle husband more than she had ever thought possible. Marcus had brought a sense of peace to her life that she hadn't realized she was missing. The constant political maneuvering and military posturing that dominated Zarathi society seemed to fade into the background when she was with him. He had a way of finding beauty in simple things that helped her see her own world through new eyes. The palace staff adored him, despite their initial confusion. Marcus had learned all their names, asked about their families, and showed genuine interest in their work. He had revolutionized the palace gardens, introducing crop rotation techniques that increased yield by 40%. He had also established what he called conflict resolution circles among the staff, which had virtually eliminated the petty disputes that had once required constant noble intervention. The other noble families had gradually accepted Marcus, though some still found him puzzling. His refusal to engage in the traditional power games that dominated court life was initially seen as weakness, but his consistent kindness and reliability had earned him respect. When Lord Kethvar's youngest daughter had fallen seriously ill, Marcus had worked tirelessly with the court physicians, sharing human medical knowledge that had ultimately saved her life. The incident had cemented his reputation as someone genuinely devoted to the welfare of others. Yet despite her love and admiration for Marcus, Zara sometimes wondered about the world he had left behind. He spoke fondly of Earth, describing vast oceans and diverse climates, but he rarely mentioned his life there in detail. When she asked about his family, he would grow quiet and simply say they understood his mission. When she inquired about human society, he would share fascinating stories about art, music, and literature, but seemed reluctant to discuss politics or history beyond the most general terms. The human embassy staff that had arrived with Marcus were equally enigmatic. They were all as polite and peaceful as Marcus himself, working diligently to establish trade relations and cultural exchanges. They had introduced several innovations that had improved life on Zerion Prime, including new agricultural techniques and medical treatments. Yet Zara noticed they all shared a certain watchfulness, a way of observing their surroundings that seemed at odds with their gentle demeanor. Recently, disturbing news had begun to reach the Zarathi Empire from the Outer Rim territories. Several aggressive species had formed an alliance, calling themselves the Devourer Coalition. They had been conquering smaller civilizations with ruthless efficiency, enslaving populations and stripping planets of resources. The Coalition's forces were vast, and their technology was formidable, incorporating weapons and ships stolen from dozens of conquered races. Intelligence reports suggested the Coalition was planning to expand into Zarathi space within the next few years. The Emperor had called for increased military preparedness, and the noble houses were already beginning to position themselves for the coming conflict. Some were advocating for preemptive strikes, while others favored building defensive alliances with neighboring species. Throughout these discussions, Marcus remained his usual calm self. He listened to the war councils when invited, offering occasional insights about logistics or resource management, but never advocating for any particular strategy. When pressed for the human perspective on the Coalition threat, he would simply say that humanity preferred diplomatic solutions and would support whatever course the Zarathi chose. This morning, as Zara watched her husband tend to his garden below, she felt a mixture of love and frustration. The Coalition threat was growing more serious each day, and she wished Marcus could offer more substantial assistance. The human colony was small, and their technology seemed limited compared to the great powers of the galaxy. She knew Marcus cared deeply about her people, but she also understood the reality of their situation. When the war came, the humans would likely be more of a liability than an asset. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Zara activated the communication panel, expecting routine diplomatic correspondence. Instead, the holographic image of her brother, Admiral Kextheel, appeared with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "Sister," he said without preamble, "we've just received intelligence about the Coalition's latest conquest. They attacked a system at the edge of human space." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "The results were unexpected." Zara felt a chill run through her scales. "How bad was the damage to the human colony?" Kextheel's expression grew even more complex. "Sister, there was no damage to the human colony. The Coalition fleet, 300 ships, including their flagship dreadnought, was completely destroyed. No survivors, no escape pods, no distress signals, just debris." "How is that possible?" Zara asked, though something deep in her mind was already beginning to whisper possibilities she didn't want to consider. "The humans are claiming it was a tragic misunderstanding," her brother continued. "They've sent formal apologies to the Coalition's remaining leadership and offered to discuss reparations for what they're calling an unfortunate defensive response." "But sister," Our long-range sensors captured some of the energy signatures from the battle. The weapons that destroyed that fleet, we've never seen anything like them." As her brother's transmission ended, Zara looked down at the garden where her gentle husband was carefully pruning his tomato plants, humming a soft human melody. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, she found herself wondering if she really knew Marcus at all. And deep in her mind, a small voice was beginning to suggest that perhaps the human diplomatic mission to Xerion Prime had purposes that went far beyond establishing trade relations and cultural exchange. The morning suns continued to rise, but somehow the light seemed different now, casting shadows that hadn't been there before. The revelation about the Coalition fleet's destruction haunted Zara for days. She found herself studying Marcus with new eyes, searching for signs she might have missed. Yet her husband remained exactly as he had always been, gentle, thoughtful, and completely devoted to his simple pleasures. He continued tending his garden, reading ancient Zerathi poetry, and helping the palace staff with their daily challenges. If he was aware of the whispers spreading through the court about human military capabilities, he gave no indication. 3 weeks after her brother's startling revelation, Zara decided she needed answers. She found Marcus in his study, a cozy room filled with books from both their worlds and sketches of hybrid plant designs. He looked up as she entered, his warm smile making her heart ache with the complexity of her feelings. "Marcus," she began carefully, "I've been hearing disturbing reports about the Coalition. They seem to be expanding their territory more aggressively." He nodded gravely, setting down the botanical journal he had been reading. "Yes, it's troubling news. Violence rarely solves anything, but some beings seem determined to pursue it anyway. The reports mention that they recently lost a fleet near human space," Zara continued, watching his reaction closely. 300 ships completely destroyed. Do you know anything about that?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression becoming thoughtful in a way she had rarely seen. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of sadness. "War is a terrible thing, Zara. When beings choose to threaten innocent populations, sometimes defensive actions become necessary. But any loss of life is regrettable." It wasn't exactly an answer, and they both knew it. Zara felt a mixture of frustration and growing unease. "Marcus, I need to understand something. When we first met, when your people established relations with the Empire, were you completely honest about human capabilities?" Her husband stood and walked to the window overlooking his garden. For several minutes, he simply stood there, and Zara could see some internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he turned back to her with an expression she had never seen before. Not the gentle scholar she had married, but something harder, more complex. "Zara, do you remember what I told you about human history when we first met? You said humans had learned to value peace after experiencing the costs of war." "That's true," Marcus said quietly. "But perhaps I wasn't as complete in that explanation as I should have been. You see, the reason humans value peace so deeply is because we became very, very good at war." Too good. Before Zara could respond, an urgent alarm began sounding throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the room in red as the communication system crackled to life with her brother's voice. "All defense stations to full alert. Coalition forces have entered Zerathi space. Initial count shows over 1,500 ships approaching the outer colonies. This is not a drill." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Zara saw something there that made her scales ripple with instinctive recognition of a predator. "I had hoped we would have more time," he said softly. "Time for what?" "To show you who we really are gradually, in a way that wouldn't frighten you." He activated a small device Zara had never seen before, speaking into it in rapid human language. She could only understand fragments. But she caught words like confirmation, defense protocols, and full disclosure authorized. Within minutes, the study door opened to admit 3 members of the human embassy staff. Zara had known them for years. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had worked with the palace physicians, Engineer Rodriguez, who had helped upgrade the palace's environmental systems, and Ambassador Jackson, who had always seemed like a grandfather figure with his warm smile and endless stories about Earth's history. Except now they moved with military precision, and Zara noticed for the first time that all of them had the same watchful awareness she had observed in Marcus. Ambassador Jackson was carrying a device that projected a holographic display showing the approaching coalition fleet in real time. "Princess," Dr. Kim said with a respectful bow, "we apologize for the deception, but it was deemed necessary for the safety of both our peoples." "What deception?" Zara asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would change everything. Engineer Rodriguez activated another device, and suddenly, the air above them filled with a 3-dimensional tactical display that was far more sophisticated than anything in the Zarathi military arsenal. The display showed not just the coalition fleet, but also what appeared to be human ships positioned throughout Zarathi space, ships that had somehow remained completely undetected by all Zarathi sensors. The human diplomatic mission to Zarion Prime was genuine, Ambassador Jackson explained, his grandfatherly demeanor now revealing hints of something much more formidable. "We truly did come seeking peace and cultural exchange. But we also came to evaluate the Zarathi Empire as potential allies in a larger conflict." "The coalition isn't just expanding randomly," Dr. Kim added. "They're testing the defenses of every major power in this galaxy sector. Eventually, they would have come for humanity as well. We prefer to choose our battlefields." Marcus stepped forward, taking Zara's hands in his own. "Everything I told you about myself was true. I am a scholar. I do love gardening and poetry, and I absolutely meant every word when I said I loved you and wanted to spend my life with you. But I'm also something else." The tactical display shifted, showing personnel files with Marcus's image. Zara's eyes widened as she read the alien script that had been translated into Zarathi. "Colonel Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Force Special Operations. Specialist in deep-cover diplomatic missions and asymmetric warfare." "You're a soldier," Zara whispered. "I was a soldier," Marcus corrected gently. "Now I'm a husband, a gardener, and a man who has found peace among people he has grown to love. But when those people are threatened..." His expression hardened again. "Yes, I remember how to be a soldier." The display now showed the true scope of human presence in the region. What had appeared to be a single small colony was revealed as an advanced military base. The dozen ships that had brought the human diplomatic mission were actually sophisticated stealth vessels that had been quietly mapping every strategic location in Zarathi space. And there were more human ships arriving every hour, emerging from what appeared to be empty space as their cloaking systems deactivated. "The Coalition believes they're facing a technologically inferior Zarathi defense force," Ambassador Jackson explained. "They have no idea that the harmless humans have been studying their tactics and technology for months while they conquered those other systems." Dr. Kim manipulated the display, showing detailed analyses of coalition weapons, ship designs, and battle strategies. "Every engagement they've fought, we've observed and analyzed. We know their weaknesses, their command structure, and their standard operating procedures." "But why the deception?" Zara asked, though she was beginning to understand. "Why not simply approach us as military allies from the beginning?" Marcus squeezed her hands gently. "Because military alliances are built on mutual need and often dissolved when that need ends. But friendship, love, cultural exchange, those bonds are stronger. We didn't want the Zarathi as temporary allies. We wanted you as permanent friends." Engineer Rodriguez brought up another display showing human industrial capacity. The 12 colonies you're aware of? There are actually 47 human systems in this galaxy sector alone. And Earth has been preparing for interstellar conflict for over a century. The scope of the revelation was staggering. Everything Zara thought she knew about humanity was simultaneously true and completely incomplete. They were peaceful scholars and gardeners and poets, but they were also warriors who had spent generations preparing for exactly this kind of threat. "The coalition fleet approaching your colonies," Dr. Kim said quietly. "They think they're facing standard Zarathi defenses. They have no idea they're about to encounter human military doctrine." "What is human military doctrine?" Zara asked, though something told her she wasn't prepared for the answer. Marcus looked at her with infinite gentleness. Even as his eyes held depths she was only beginning to fathom. Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to protect the things you love is to make sure your enemies never want to fight you again. We don't just win battles, Zara. We make examples that prevent future conflicts. Ambassador Jackson nodded gravely. The coalition has been expanding because they've never encountered serious resistance. They've grown overconfident, careless. They're about to learn why humans spent 300 years studying the art of war before we ever left our home system. The tactical display now showed the coalition fleet entering range of what appeared to be standard Zarathi defense platforms. But Zara could see additional signatures that her people's sensors couldn't detect. Human ships waiting in perfect position to demonstrate exactly why they had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species when threatened. "What happens now?" Zara asked. Marcus smiled, and for a moment he was simply her gentle husband again. "Now we show the coalition and the galaxy what happens when someone threatens our friends. And then, hopefully, we can go back to tending our garden and writing poetry together." As alarms continued to sound throughout the palace, Zara realized she was about to witness something unprecedented, humanity showing the galaxy exactly why they valued peace so highly, because they were terrifyingly good at war. The command center of the Celestial Palace had been transformed into something resembling the bridge of a warship. Human technicians worked alongside Zarathi military officers, their equipment seamlessly integrating with systems that Zara was beginning to realize had been quietly upgraded over the past 3 years. The massive holographic display now showed the approaching coalition fleet in devastating detail. 1,500 ships arranged in the standard coalition formation that had proven unstoppable against every other species they had encountered. Admiral Kexthiel stood at the center of it all, his usual composed demeanor cracking as he struggled to process the tactical information flowing from human sensors. "Sister," he said as Zara approached, "your husband's people have been thorough in their preparations." Marcus stood beside the Admiral, no longer the quiet gardener, but clearly a military professional consulting with his counterpart. "Admiral, the Coalition Vanguard will reach the outer colonies in approximately 2 hours. Their standard procedure is to demand immediate surrender, then begin orbital bombardment of population centers if refused." "And if we follow the standard Zarathi response?" Kexthiel asked. "Your defense fleet would inflict significant casualties but would ultimately be overwhelmed," Dr. Kim answered from her position at the tactical analysis station. The Coalition's numerical superiority and their willingness to accept massive losses would eventually break through. Engineer Rodriguez manipulated the display, highlighting weak points in the coalition formation. "However, they're using the same tactical approach that worked against the 17 other species they've conquered. They haven't adapted their strategy because they haven't needed to." Ambassador Jackson stepped forward, his grandfatherly appearance now clearly revealed as the perfect cover for someone who had probably been analyzing alien military tactics for decades. "Colonel Chen, are your people ready to implement the Windsor Protocol?" Marcus nodded grimly. "All human assets are in position. Admiral Kexthiel, We need your formal authorization to engage as auxiliary forces supporting the Zarathi defense." "You have it," the Admiral replied immediately. "But I must ask, what exactly is the Windsor Protocol?" Dr. Kim brought up a new display showing historical data from human conflicts. Named after the Battle of Windsor, where human forces first demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated stealth tactics against a numerically superior enemy. The principle is simple: make the enemy's numbers work against them. "I don't understand," Zara said. Marcus turned to her, his expression gentle despite the military precision in his voice. "The Coalition relies on overwhelming force because they've never faced an enemy that could turn their strength into a weakness. They pack their fleets tight for maximum firepower concentration, use standardized communication protocols for coordination, and expect their enemies to meet them in traditional fleet engagements." "And humans don't fight traditional fleet engagements," Engineer Rodriguez added with what might have been a predatory smile. The display shifted to show real-time positions of human ships throughout the system. There were far more than Zara had imagined. Sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around them, positioned not in defensive formations, but in a complex three-dimensional web that surrounded the Coalition approach routes. "The Coalition thinks they're facing 37 Zarathi defense ships," Ambassador Jackson explained. "They're actually walking into a coordinated attack by 200 human vessels that have been studying their every move for months." "But that's still massively outnumbered," Admiral Kexathiel protested. "Numbers only matter if your enemy can see you coming," Marcus replied. "And if they're forced to fight the kind of battle they trained for instead of the one we're going to give them." Dr. Kim activated another interface, and suddenly the holographic display was filled with streaming data that showed individual Coalition ships, their weapon configurations, crew complements, and command hierarchies. While our diplomatic mission was establishing cultural ties, our intelligence operatives were infiltrating Coalition communications networks. We know which ships contain their fleet commanders, which ones have their most experienced crews, and which ones are carrying prototype weapons they're field testing. The scope of human preparation was breathtaking. Zara realized that every conversation Marcus had ever had with Zarathi military officials, every question about defense protocols and strategic thinking, had been part of an intelligence-gathering operation that spanned years. Yet somehow, his genuine affection for her people had never felt false. "Contact from the Coalition fleet," announced a Zarathi communications officer. "They're demanding immediate surrender of all outer colonies and payment of tribute." "Standard response," Admiral Kexathiel ordered. "Inform them that the Zarathi Empire does not negotiate with aggressors." On the display, the Coalition fleet began adjusting formation for attack approach. Their ships moved with practiced efficiency, spreading into the bombardment pattern that had terrorized dozens of worlds. But as they maneuvered, something extraordinary began happening on the human tactical display. "Marking targets," Engineer Rodriguez announced. "Primary objectives are command ships, communications relays, and ammunition carriers." Marcus activated his communication device, speaking in the crisp tones of military command. "All stealth units, this is Gardner Prime. Windsor Protocol is authorized. Begin Phase 1 on my mark." He looked at Admiral Kexathiel. "Admiral, I recommend your forces hold position until we've disrupted their formation. Trust us." Marcus said quietly. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Coalition fleet continued its approach, maintaining perfect formation. Then, without warning, 12 of their largest ships simply vanished from the tactical display. Not destroyed, simply gone, as if they had never existed. The reaction among the remaining Coalition ships was immediate and chaotic. Formations began to break as commanders tried to understand what had happened to their colleagues. Communication networks lit up with panicked queries and conflicting orders. "Phase 1 complete," Dr. Kim reported calmly. "Command ship elimination successful. Targeting communication hubs." Another wave of coalition ships disappeared, but this time, Zara caught glimpses of the attacks on the sensors. Impossibly fast human vessels materializing just long enough to fire weapons that seemed to tear through coalition shields like paper, then vanishing again before return fire could be targeted. "Their communications network is fragmenting," Engineer Rodriguez announced with satisfaction. "Individual ship groups are reverting to autonomous operation." Admiral Kextheel stared at the display in amazement. In less than 10 minutes, the terrifying coalition fleet had been reduced to confused clusters of ships with no central coordination. "How is this possible?" "The coalition trains for fleet engagements," Marcus explained, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Large formations, coordinated firepower, overwhelming assault. They've never faced an enemy that could pick apart their command structure without engaging their main force." Ambassador Jackson nodded approvingly. "Phase 2, Colonel?" "Initiating now." Marcus spoke into his communicator again. "All units begin harassment protocols. Make them afraid of empty space." What followed was unlike any battle Zara had ever studied. Instead of the massive fleet engagement the coalition expected, they found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't fight effectively. Human ships appeared from nowhere, destroyed coalition vessels with devastating precision, and vanished before retaliation was possible. The remaining coalition commanders tried desperately to reform their scattered ships, but every attempt at reorganization was met by another perfectly coordinated strike. "Their morale is breaking," Dr. Kim observed, monitoring coalition communications. "Some ship groups are already requesting permission to withdraw." "Not yet," Marcus said firmly. "Phase 3, demonstration of inevitability." The human ships suddenly changed tactics. Instead of quick strikes and withdrawals, they began sustained attacks that systematically destroyed coalition vessels one by one. But they did it slowly, methodically, ensuring that every remaining ship could see exactly how helpless they were. It wasn't just military victory, it was psychological warfare designed to break the will of any survivors. "Colonel," Ambassador Jackson said quietly, "we're receiving surrender requests from 47 coalition ships." Marcus looked at Admiral Kextheel. "Admiral, this is your space. How do you want to handle coalition surrender?" Kextheel was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display that showed the remains of what had once been an unstoppable invasion fleet. "Accept surrenders, escort surviving ships to detention facilities, and send a message to coalition leadership that any future incursions into Zarathi space will be met with similar responses." As human ships began accepting coalition surrenders, Zara found herself looking at her husband with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The gentle scholar who had won her heart was still there, but now she could see the depths beneath the surface, the mind that had planned this entire operation with surgical precision. "Marcus," she said quietly, "what happens now? Between us, I mean?" He turned away from the tactical display, his expression softening as he saw her uncertainty. "Now I go back to tending my garden and reading your people's poetry. Because that's who I really am, Zara. The soldier was what I needed to be to protect the life I wanted to live." Dr. Kim approached them with a final report. "Princess, the galactic community is already receiving reports of this engagement. Word is spreading that humanity has capabilities that were previously unknown. We expect several species to request diplomatic contact within the next few weeks." "And the coalition?" Zara asked. Ambassador Jackson smiled, the gentle grandfather again, though now Zara could see the steel beneath. "The coalition has built their power on fear. Once that fear is broken, empires like theirs tend to collapse very quickly. We estimate their subject species will begin declaring independence within days." Engineer Rodriguez was already shutting down the advanced tactical systems, returning the command center to its normal Zarathi configuration. The human fleet will remain in the area for another month to ensure stability, then withdraw to standard diplomatic levels. As the immediate crisis passed, Zara realized that her world and the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity had revealed itself as perhaps the most formidable military force in known space, but they had done so in defense of friends rather than conquest. It was a demonstration of power that somehow made the promise of peace more credible rather than less. Marcus took her hands again, his eyes holding all the gentleness she had fallen in love with. "I know this changes things between us. I know you need time to process what you've learned, but I hope you can understand that everything I've told you about my feelings, about who I want to be with you, was absolutely true." Zara looked into his eyes and saw not the strategic mind that had just orchestrated the destruction of an invasion fleet, but the man who had spent 3 years learning to make her happy, who had created beauty from 2 incompatible worlds, who had brought peace to her life in ways she hadn't known she needed. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'm beginning to understand why humans value peace so highly, and why the galaxy is very fortunate that you prefer gardening to conquest." Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his face back to the gentle scholar she had married. "Would you like to help me check on the tomatoes? I think the excitement might have stressed them." As they walked together toward their garden, Zara reflected on the day's revelations. The galaxy now knew that humanity was not the harmless species they had pretended to be. But more importantly, they had shown that beings could be capable of devastating war while choosing the path of peace. It was a lesson that would reshape interstellar relations for generations to come. Behind them, the last of the coalition ships was being escorted away by vessels that had already faded back into invisibility. The demonstration was over, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy. The age of conquest through superior force was ending, replaced by something humanity had long understood, that true strength lay in knowing when not to use the power you possessed. In the garden, Marcus hummed softly as he examined his plants, just as he had every morning for 3 years. But now Zara understood the profound courage it took for someone capable of orchestrating such precise destruction to choose instead to nurture life and love. It was perhaps the most human thing of all, the choice to be gentle when you could easily be terrible. The tomatoes, as it turned out, were perfectly fine.